The alarm buzzed at 4:30 a.m. sharp, echoing through the small apartment like a battle siren. Corporal Emily Parker rolled out of bed before it could ring twice. The air was cold, and the floor bit at her bare feet as she crossed to the mirror. Her reflection looked back tired eyes, determined jawline, hair tied neatly into regulation bun. She didn't smile. Not yet. There was work to do. It was her first official day guarding Gate 14 at the Norfolk Naval Station, one of the busiest and most heavily trafficked entrances on the East Coast. For many, it was considered a dead-end assignment. 12-hour shifts, endless ID checks, and little excitement. Most soldiers saw it as punishment duty, something to endure until a better post opened. But for Emily, this wasn't just a job, it was a calling. She laid her uniform out on the bed, neatly pressed camouflage fatigues, spotless boots, her cap perfectly creased. Every detail mattered. Her father's old military medal, a silver coin engraved with the words Semper Fidelis, sat beside her badge. She picked it up and rubbed it between her fingers for luck, just as she did before every shift. "Here's to another day, Dad," she whispered under her breath. Her father, Sergeant James Parker, had served 2 tours in Afghanistan. He never came home from the second one. Emily had been 17 when the folded flag arrived at their doorstep, handed to her by a solemn Marine officer. Since that day, she had sworn to wear the same uniform with the same pride. No matter how small the duty, she'd treat it as sacred. By 5:15, she was on base, her boots echoing against the wet concrete. The dawn fog hung low, blurring the outlines of distant aircraft hangars and the faint glow of the harbor beyond. She stopped in front of Gate 14, the post she'd been assigned to for the next 6 months. 2 guards were already there. Lance Corporal Decker, a lanky man in his mid-20s, who always had a smirk plastered on his face, and Private Simmons, a new recruit barely out of training. They were slouched near the booth, sipping coffee and scrolling through their phones. "Morning," Emily said briskly, setting her bag down. Decker looked up lazily. "You're the new one, huh? Heard they're making you our shift lead." Emily nodded. "That's right. I'll be checking vehicles from 0600 to 1800. You two handle the side lane and visitor clearance." Decker smirked again. "Sure thing, Corporal. But relax, all right? It's gate duty, not combat." Emily's jaw tightened slightly. Every post deserves attention. This gate controls entry for over 5,000 personnel a day. That's a big responsibility. Decker rolled his eyes, but said nothing. Simmons quickly straightened his posture, mimicking Emily's stance. The shift began at 6 a.m. sharp. The base came alive with the rumble of engines, the chatter of soldiers, and the shrill whistle of morning drills in the distance. Vehicles lined up in long queues, civilian contractors, officers, and enlisted men heading to their stations. Emily stood firm, every movement precise. ID check, salute, gate open, gate close. She memorized faces, names, even license plates. She noticed how people carried themselves, the slouch of fatigue, the quick nod of acknowledgement, the distracted glance of officers glued to their phones. Most people passed through without looking her in the eye. To them, she was just another guard. But Emily didn't mind. Her pride came from doing things right, not from being seen. Around 8 a.m., Decker leaned against the wall, yawning. "You know, Parker, you really don't have to salute every single car that passes. Half these guys don't even notice." "I notice," Emily replied simply. "That's what matters." He chuckled. "You're something else." The hours stretched. The sun climbed higher, burning through the mist. Sweat collected under her collar, but her stance didn't waver. Every movement was deliberate, just like her father had taught her. Discipline isn't about orders. It's about character, he used to say. At noon, A black SUV approached slowly. Its tinted windows reflected the glare of the sun, and its license plate bore an insignia Emily didn't immediately recognize. She held up her hand, signaling the vehicle to stop. "Morning, sir. Identification, please." The window rolled down, revealing a man in his 40s with sharp eyes, clean-cut hair, and a calm but powerful presence. His uniform bore the rank of Commander, a Navy SEAL, judging by the trident pin on his chest. Emily's voice remained steady. "Good morning, Commander. Please present your base ID." He raised an eyebrow slightly, then handed it over. "Commander Jack Reynolds, SEAL Team 2. Emily scanned the ID, checked the holographic marks, then returned it with a salute so crisp it could have sliced the air. "Thank you, sir. Welcome aboard." The commander studied her for a brief moment before nodding. "Carry on, Corporal." As the SUV rolled through, Decker muttered under his breath, "You didn't have to be that formal." "That's Jack Reynolds. Everyone just waves him through." Emily glanced at him. "Everyone shouldn't." Decker snorted, shaking his head. "You'll learn." But Reynolds didn't forget that moment. As he drove down the main road, he glanced in his rearview mirror, watching the small figure at the gate shrink behind him. Her salute had been perfect, not robotic, not forced, just precise and full of respect. It reminded him of something he hadn't seen in years, a kind of discipline that used to define the course. Back at the gate, Emily continued her work. Hours passed. The shift changed. The flow of vehicles slowed as the afternoon heat peaked. Still, she stood tall. She noticed the way people grew careless during quiet hours, the way some skipped steps, ignored salutes, cut corners. She refused to be one of them. When her relief finally arrived, it was nearly sunset. Her back ached, and her throat felt dry from giving commands all day. Yet, as she packed her things, she felt a strange satisfaction, a quiet, burning pride that only came from giving your all, even when no one noticed. As she walked back toward her barracks, the orange light of the setting sun brushed across the base. The sky glowed behind rows of parked fighter jets, and the flag at the main post fluttered softly in the breeze. Emily paused for a moment, placing a hand over her father's medal in her pocket. "You'd like this place, Dad," she murmured softly. "You'd tell me to keep my chin up, even when no one's watching." Little did she know, that exact quality, her integrity when unseen, had already caught the attention of one man who was watching. Commander Reynolds would return the next morning, and his simple act would change her life forever. But for now, as the base lights flickered on, and the hum of distant jets filled the night, Corporal Emily Parker walked alone toward the barracks, unaware that her ordinary day at Gate 14 was about to become the story every soldier on the base would soon be talking about. The next morning arrived gray and heavy, the sky threatening rain. Corporal Emily Parker laced her boots in silence, her mind still on the black SUV from yesterday. She couldn't shake the image of the commander's steady eyes, calm, assessing, almost curious. But she brushed it off quickly. There was no reason to dwell on it. By 5:30 a.m., she was back at Gate 14, her uniform sharp, posture rigid as always. The air smelled of diesel and sea salt drifting from the docks. She saluted the flag as it was raised at dawn, her right hand perfectly still against her forehead. "Morning, Parker," came Decker's voice from behind her, half yawning. "Still got that perfect salute going, huh? You gonna salute the birds next?" Emily didn't look at him. "Respect doesn't take a break, Decker." He chuckled and took a lazy sip of coffee. "Your wound too tight, you know that? You're not in Afghanistan. You're guarding a gate. Nobody cares how straight you stand." But Emily did care. She always had. She ignored his teasing and focused on her duty. Vehicles began rolling in, trucks carrying supplies, officers arriving for morning briefings, even a few civilian contractors. Most waved quickly, barely meeting her eyes. But Emily greeted each one with the same crisp professionalism. As the hours passed, she noticed subtle glances, a few from other guards, one from her supervisor, Sergeant Miller, who watched her longer than usual. It wasn't hostile, but curious. People were talking. By noon, she understood why. When she stepped into the guardhouse for her short lunch break, the chatter stopped abruptly. Decker and two other guards were huddled over their phones, laughing at something. They looked up, trying to hide smirks. "What's going on?" Emily asked, setting her lunchbox down. Decker shrugged. "Nothing, just... the story's going around." "What story?" He grinned. "About you and the SEAL commander yesterday. You know, how you made him stop at the gate, check his ID, like he's some rookie. Apparently, the big man wasn't used to being treated like a regular officer." Emily froze. "I did my job, that's all." Decker snorted. Sure. But word is, the commander wasn't too happy. Guess we'll see if he decides to drive himself next time, or just send someone else." The others laughed quietly. Emily's jaw clenched, but she said nothing. She knew gossip was part of base life, but this was different. She hated being the center of attention, especially for something she hadn't done wrong. She finished her meal in silence, ignoring the whispers. By afternoon, rain began to fall in thin, steady sheets. Her boots splashed in shallow puddles as she continued her duties. Every ID was checked. Every salute remained sharp. Yet inside, a quiet unease grew. She replayed the commander's expression in her mind. Was he annoyed? Disrespectful? Or had there been something else in that look? At 1600 hours, Sergeant Miller approached her post. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, gruff but fair. "Parker," he said, stepping under the shelter of the guard booth. "Heard about your encounter with Commander Reynolds." "Yes, Sergeant," she replied calmly. "I followed proper protocol." "I know you did," Miller said, eyes steady. "But just so you're aware, some higher-ups don't like surprises, especially someone like Reynolds. He's a SEAL commander. He's earned a long leash around here. Just pick your battles carefully." Emily met his gaze. "With respect, Sergeant, I wasn't picking a battle. I was doing my duty." He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "That's what I like about you, Parker. Just keep doing things by the book. It'll pay off, eventually." As Miller walked away, Emily exhaled deeply. She didn't crave attention or recognition. All she wanted was to serve right. Still, it stung to know that people saw her professionalism as defiance. The rain intensified, blurring the base lights into streaks of gold and gray. Emily adjusted her cap, water dripping from its brim. Her gloves were soaked, her fingers cold, but she stayed at attention. Somewhere beyond the gate, engines roared, the sound of SEAL transport vehicles returning from training. She watched them pass in formation, men in camouflage, laughing and talking among themselves. One of them looked up and gave her a casual salute. She returned it instantly, her motion crisp and exact. The soldier smiled faintly, as if amused by her seriousness. Then they were gone. For a brief moment, Emily felt the weight of invisibility. Thousands passed her daily, yet few noticed her name, her discipline, her purpose. She wasn't a hero or a commander, just a gate guard, standing between order and chaos. But her father's voice still echoed in her heart. Respect the uniform, and it will respect you back. That night, as she returned to her room, she placed the medal on her bedside table again. The tiny engraving caught the lamplight. She thought about the day's gossip, the glances, the subtle mockery. Then she thought of her father, the way he'd stood tall, even when his men doubted him. She whispered softly, "I'm doing it right, Dad. I know I am." The next morning, the rain had stopped. The sky cleared, and the base glowed under the early sunlight. Emily arrived at Gate 14 just before 6 a.m., ready for another long shift. Decker was already there, his usual smirk plastered across his face. "Well, guess who's on time again?" he said. "You must really love this post." Emily ignored the jab. Every day's a new chance to do better. As she prepared for her inspection, she noticed the familiar black SUV turning the corner again. The sight made her pulse quicken. "Here we go," Decker muttered. Round 2. The SUV slowed as it neared the gate. Emily stepped forward, posture straight, boots aligned perfectly. "Good morning, sir," she said as the window rolled down. Her tone was respectful but steady, the same as before. Commander Jack Reynolds looked at her again, the faintest trace of a smile on his face this time. "Corporal Parker, right?" "Yes, sir." "Doing your job by the book again today?" "Yes, sir." He held her gaze for a few seconds longer, then nodded. "Good." Before she could say another word, he reached up and returned her salute, slow, deliberate, and unmistakably genuine. Emily froze. For a moment, everything around her seemed to stop, the hum of engines, the chatter of guards, even the wind. The commander of SEAL Team 2 had just saluted her first. Decker's jaw dropped. The other guards stared, stunned. Reynolds gave a faint nod and drove off without another word. Emily's heart pounded as she lowered her hand. She didn't understand what had just happened or why. But deep inside, she felt something shift. The whispers, the gossip, the doubt, all of it suddenly seemed small. She had done nothing extraordinary. She had simply shown respect. And somehow, respect had found its way back to her. As she turned to resume her post, the sun broke through the clouds, casting light over the wet asphalt and the proud American flag waving above the gate. For the first time since her father's death, Emily felt truly seen, not as a soldier standing guard, but as someone who still believed that honor wasn't about rank or recognition. It was about how you carried yourself when no one was watching. The base was never quiet, but that morning, Gate 14 seemed to hum with a different kind of energy. Something unseen, unspoken, rippled through the air. The moment Commander Jack Reynolds had stepped out of his SUV and saluted Corporal Emily Parker first, time itself had seemed to freeze. For a heartbeat, no one had moved. Rainwater dripped from the metal roof of the guard booth, each drop sounding impossibly loud in the silence. Then Reynolds lowered his hand, nodded once, and drove through the gate like nothing unusual had happened. But the world had noticed. Decker's coffee cup hit the ground, splattering across his boots. "What the hell just happened?" he muttered. Emily didn't answer. Her hand was still halfway raised from the salute, trembling slightly. She lowered it slowly, her mind racing. He saluted first. "No, no, no," Decker said, eyes wide. "That doesn't happen. That never happens. Do you even know who that man is?" "I do," Emily replied softly, still staring at the road where the SUV had disappeared. "Commander Jack Reynolds. SEAL Team 2. Decker shook his head, as if trying to convince himself it was real. "The guy's a legend around here. Served 20 years, led classified missions, has more medals than he can wear at once. He doesn't salute corporals. He barely salutes colonels." Emily said nothing. She adjusted her cap, her expression unreadable, but inside her chest, her heart pounded like a drum. She didn't feel proud or triumphant. She felt confused. When her shift ended at 1800 hours, the base was already buzzing. She could feel it in the glances people gave her as she walked past the mess hall. Two Marines whispered near the vending machine, pausing when she walked by. A Navy tech she didn't even know smiled faintly and gave her a quiet nod of respect. Something had changed. By the time she reached her barracks, a message from Sergeant Miller waited on her phone. Report to my office at 0700 tomorrow. Dress uniform. Miller, her stomach twisted. She couldn't tell if she was in trouble or about to be commended. That night, Emily barely slept. She lay in her bunk, staring at the dark ceiling, replaying every second of that encounter. His salute hadn't been quick or mocking. It was deliberate, full of meaning. It wasn't pity, either. It was acknowledgement. Why me? She thought again and again. When morning came, she stood before Sergeant Miller's office in her pressed dress uniform. The hallway smelled of coffee and floor polish. She knocked once and entered. Miller was standing by the window, hands clasped behind his back. At ease, Parker, he said, not turning around. Yes, Sergeant. He finally faced her, studying her expression. So, I hear you made quite an impression yesterday. Sir, if this is about Commander Reynolds. It is, he interrupted, his voice calm but sharp. I've had 3 calls since last night. One from the security chief, one from the adjutant's office, and one, he paused, from the commander himself. Emily's pulse quickened. Sir, I didn't do anything outside of regulation. I know you didn't. Miller walked to his desk, opening a folder. Reynolds personally called to commend your professionalism. Said you were the only one at that gate who treated him like a soldier instead of a celebrity. His words, not mine. Emily blinked, taken aback. He said that? He did. And now half the base is talking about it. Miller sighed and leaned back in his chair. You should understand what this means, Parker. The SEAL teams are practically royalty around here. When someone like that salutes a corporal first, it sends a message, one that's echoing across every unit. Emily swallowed hard. What kind of message, sir? He gave her a small, knowing smile. That respect isn't a one-way street. That discipline still matters. That maybe this place hasn't completely forgotten what service means. She stood silent for a moment. Her throat tightened. She hadn't meant to start a movement. She just wanted to do her job right. Thank you, sir, she finally said quietly. Miller nodded. Good work, Parker. Dismissed. When she stepped out of the office, the hallway felt brighter, somehow lighter. But outside, whispers were already waiting. 2 guards near the gatehouse glanced at her as she passed. That's her, one murmured. The one Reynolds saluted. Emily kept walking. The attention made her uneasy. She'd never wanted to be noticed. All she wanted was to serve well, not to be part of gossip. Later that afternoon, when she returned to Gate 14 for her next shift, a new supervisor was waiting, Lieutenant Harris, the base's operations officer. He was young for his rank, confident, and carried an air of self-importance. So, he said, walking up with a grin, you're the famous Parker. Just doing my duty, sir, she said evenly. Hung. You sure stirred things up. Commander Reynolds salutes you first, and now every soldier on base wants to copy your perfect salute. He laughed. You've started a trend. Emily didn't return the smile. I didn't mean to, sir. I only followed protocol. Harris shrugged. Still, it's impressive. He's not an easy man to impress. Keep it up, but remember, not everyone likes attention. Some officers might feel overshadowed. She nodded silently, understanding the warning behind his words. When the shift began, Emily noticed something unusual. The soldiers passing through the gate seemed a little more formal. A few even saluted first, something rarely done toward lower ranks. It wasn't mockery, it was respect. Decker watched it all unfold, shaking his head. You're a legend now, Parker. You didn't just guard the gate, you broke the chain of command. I didn't break anything, Emily said firmly. He chose to salute. That was his decision. Decker gave a half smile. Maybe. Or maybe he saw something in you the rest of us missed. The words stuck with her for the rest of the day. By late afternoon, the familiar black SUV appeared again. Emily felt her heart skip. She stepped forward, posture perfect. This time, Reynolds didn't drive through immediately. He stopped, rolled down the window, and said, "Corporal Parker." "Yes, sir." "You're causing quite a storm out here," he said, his tone neither stern nor teasing. "Half the base thinks I've gone soft." Emily stood tall. "Sir, I didn't mean to cause disruption." He studied her for a moment. "You didn't. You reminded them what respect looks like." For a moment, his eyes softened, not as a superior officer, but as someone who understood. Then he gave a faint smile. "Carry on, Corporal." "Yes, sir." He drove off, leaving Emily frozen once again. But this time, she didn't feel confused. She felt proud. As the sun dipped low over the base, painting the sky orange and red, Emily looked up at the flag above the gate. The wind caught it, sending it rippling proudly in the light. Around her, soldiers passed by, each now offering their salutes without hesitation. For the first time since joining the military, Emily felt something shift, not just within herself, but in the spirit of the base. Her small act of integrity had sparked something larger, something she couldn't fully name yet. She didn't know that this was only the beginning, that the salute, which had turned heads today, would soon shake the entire command. For now, she simply stood tall, guarding her gate, her heart steady with pride. The next few days on base felt different. Every morning, as the sun broke over the wire fences, the air buzzed with whispers about the salute. It wasn't just another story anymore. It had become a legend. "Did you hear?" SEAL Commander Reynolds saluted that gate guard first. "No way. SEALs don't salute anyone." Well, he did. And she didn't even flinch. It spread through the barracks like wildfire, every version a little more dramatic than the last. Some said she saved the commander's life once. Others claimed she had connections in higher command. But Emily Parker knew the truth. She was just a corporal who did her duty, and a man of honor had noticed. Still, not everyone liked it. By Thursday, a quiet tension began to form around her post. Lieutenant Harris, the same officer who had warned her earlier, started showing up more often. He would circle the gate during inspections, linger longer than necessary, and scrutinize every movement she made. "Your salute was a fraction late," he said one morning, jotting something on his clipboard. "Sir, regulation timing is within 2 seconds. Then make it 1. He didn't look up. "You've got eyes on you, Corporal. Don't forget that." Emily held her composure. "Yes, sir." When he left, Decker leaned over and muttered, "He's jealous." "Jealous of what?" Emily asked. "Of the fact that a SEAL commander noticed you, and not him. Some officers don't like when attention skips a few ranks." Emily didn't reply. She focused on the vehicles passing through, her movements sharp, mechanical. But inside, she could feel the unease spreading. Respect was one thing, politics was another. That afternoon, the base buzzed again. Word spread that Commander Reynolds was back, not for an inspection, not for a mission, but for a meeting with the base commanding officer, Colonel Thomas Granger. And apparently, Emily's name was on the agenda. By evening, Sergeant Miller called her into his office again. His face was unreadable, but his tone was low and serious. "Parker, you're to report to the administrative hall tomorrow morning at 0900. Command meeting. Am I in trouble, sir?" He shook his head slowly. "No, but when officers start talking about enlisted names in staff meetings, it's never small talk. Keep your head clear." The next morning, Emily put on her best dress uniform again, polished boots gleaming, ribbons perfectly aligned. She arrived at the administrative hall 5 minutes early. The walls, inside lined with photos of heroes who had served before them. When she was finally called in, she froze. At the end of the long oak table sat Colonel Granger, arms folded, flanked by his senior officers. On the right sat Lieutenant Harris, his expression sharp, and on the left, Commander Jack Reynolds himself, calm and composed. "Corporal Parker, step forward," Granger ordered. Emily saluted. "Sir, at ease. We've had quite a few reports about you this week." "Yes, sir. Some commendations. Some concerns." Harris leaned forward. "Sir, with respect, this recent attention is disrupting chain of command protocol. Other enlisted personnel have started treating her differently, saluting before rank, breaking decorum." Granger nodded slightly. "Commander Reynolds, would you care to explain your side of this?" Reynolds clasped his hands. "Certainly, Colonel." He turned to face Emily. "Corporal Parker, when I arrived at Gate 14 that morning, you were the only one standing at full attention. No slouching, no coffee in hand, no half-hearted gestures. You looked me in the eye, did your job exactly as written. That kind of discipline deserves acknowledgement, regardless of rank." Granger raised an eyebrow. "So you saluted her first to make a point?" Reynolds smiled faintly. "To make a reminder. That respect in this uniform isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. If a corporal shows more pride in service than a commander, maybe the salute belongs to her first." The room went silent. Harris shifted uncomfortably. "With all due respect, sir, that's not how military hierarchy works." Reynolds' eyes flicked toward him, calm but razor-sharp. "And with all due respect, Lieutenant, hierarchy means nothing if the people in it forget why it exists." Granger studied them both, the tension thick as smoke. After a long pause, he spoke. "Corporal Parker, you've unintentionally become the center of quite a debate here. But I've read your file. Clean record, top of your training class, 0 infractions." "Thank you, sir," she said quietly. He nodded. "We'll be monitoring this situation, but for now, continue your post as assigned. Dismissed." Emily saluted sharply and stepped out, her pulse still racing. As the heavy door closed behind her, she exhaled a shaky breath. Moments later, she heard the door open again. Commander Reynolds stepped out, stopping beside her in the hallway. "You handled that well," he said. "Thank you, sir," she replied, still tense. "But I didn't mean to cause all this." He chuckled softly. "The best changes never start with meaning to. They just happen when someone does the right thing." Emily hesitated. "Sir, may I ask something?" "Of course." "When you saluted, was it just respect? Or was there more to it?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I saw my younger self in you, Parker. Someone who still believed that every salute mattered. Somewhere along the way, people forget. You reminded me." Before she could respond, a young sailor hurried up with a message for him. Reynolds nodded and started to leave, but then paused and said, "You ever need help, come find me at the training range. That's where the real soldiers are." And with that, he was gone. Emily stood there, the words echoing in her mind. The real soldiers. Back at the gate that evening, things were quieter. The gossip had started to fade, replaced by something else. Quiet admiration. Vehicles slowed down just enough for the drivers to give her a crisp salute. Marines, sailors, even a few officers. Decker grinned. "Looks like the salute's gone viral." Emily smiled faintly. "Maybe it's not about me." "Maybe not," he said. "But you're the spark." That night, as she walked across the dark base toward the barracks, the wind carried faint echoes of laughter and marching boots. She looked up at the sky, the stars sharp and cold above her. She had no idea that Reynolds' words in that meeting would soon travel further than anyone expected. That the story of a simple gate guard and a SEAL commander's salute would reach the Pentagon itself before the month was over. For now, she was content to stand her post, silent but proud. She wasn't looking for fame. She was just holding the line, proof that integrity, even at the smallest gate on base, could still shake the biggest walls. And in the quiet glow of the guard lights, Emily Parker's legend continued to grow, one salute at a time. 2 weeks had passed since the confrontation in the conference room, and life on the base had begun to move again, but not quite the same. Something in the air had changed. You could see it in the way soldiers carried themselves, in the way they saluted each other, and even in how the new recruits at morning drill stood taller. Everyone was talking about Corporal Emily Parker. At first, Emily hated the attention. She wasn't used to it. She didn't want to be the center of gossip or some accidental hero. But the story had a life of its own. It traveled through the barracks, past the mess hall, through the chain of command, until it reached places far above her pay grade. And then, one morning, a message arrived from the base adjutant's office. Corporal Parker, report to Colonel Granger's office at 0900 sharp. Formal attire required. When Emily entered the colonel's office, the sight of 3 men in suits waiting inside told her immediately this wasn't routine. They weren't military, at least not in uniform. The small flag pins on their lapels gave it away. Pentagon representatives. Corporal Parker, Colonel Granger said, motioning her forward. These gentlemen are from the Department of Defense Public Affairs Division. One of them, an older man with graying hair, smiled politely. Corporal, it's good to meet you. We've heard quite a story about you and Commander Reynolds. Emily straightened. Sir, if I may, it was nothing more than a proper exchange of respect. He chuckled softly. Perhaps to you, but it's become something more. That salute, it's been cited in an internal morale report as an example of exemplary conduct. The story's spreading, and the Secretary of Defense wants to highlight it at the upcoming Values in Service ceremony in Washington. Emily blinked. Sir, you want me to attend? Not just attend, he replied. You'll be one of the honorees. For a moment, Emily didn't breathe. She'd imagined a lot of things happening in her career. Commendations, perhaps a promotion someday, but never this. Never being called to the Pentagon because she'd done her job the right way. Colonel Granger gave her a rare smile. You've done us proud, Parker. Pack your things. You leave Monday morning. And don't worry, Commander Reynolds will be there too. The next few days were a blur. The base's energy shifted again. Some soldiers cheered her on, proud that one of their own was being recognized. Others whispered jealousy under their breath, claiming she'd gotten lucky, that she'd done nothing special. Decker, her closest friend on post, grinned when she told him. Washington, huh? Don't forget about us when you're shaking hands with generals. Emily laughed nervously. I'm not even sure I belong there. He shook his head. You earned it, Parker. Don't downplay it. When Monday arrived, she stood on the airfield in her full dress blues, the morning sun glinting off her polished brass. The transport jet waited on the runway, engines humming. Commander Reynolds was already there, leaning against a jeep, a cup of coffee in hand. Morning, Corporal, he said with that familiar calm. Sir, she replied, saluting sharply. He returned it, again first. Then he smiled. Looks like you and I started something, didn't we? I think you did, sir. Reynolds shook his head. No, Parker. You reminded people what it means to stand tall, even when no one's watching. That's rare. The Pentagon needs to see more of that. As they boarded the aircraft, Emily stared out the small round window as the base grew smaller below. The endless lines of barracks, the training fields, and the gate she'd guarded so many mornings, all shrinking into the distance. She realized something then. Her life was no longer ordinary. When they landed at Joint Base Andrews, the contrast was immediate. The air was crisper, the security tighter, and the people all polished, all watching. Emily followed Reynolds through a series of briefings and rehearsals, feeling out of place among officers and officials. That night, in her assigned quarters, she couldn't sleep. She kept replaying everything: the first salute, the meeting, the jealousy, the endless whispers. She wasn't a hero, not in her mind. She'd only done what her father, a veteran himself, had once told her: no matter who's watching, wear your uniform with pride. The next morning, the ceremony began. Rows of decorated officers filled the auditorium, their medals glinting beneath the stage lights. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered. When Emily's name was called, her heart thundered in her chest. She walked onto the stage, every step echoing through the hall. The announcer's voice rang out, for upholding the highest traditions of military respect and discipline, exemplified through an act that inspired servicemen and women across branches. Corporal Emily Parker, United States Marine Corps. Applause filled the hall. She looked across the stage, and there was Commander Reynolds, smiling proudly. When the Secretary of Defense stepped forward to shake her hand, he said quietly, "You reminded us that rank means nothing without respect." The ceremony was surreal. Flashbulbs went off. Officials asked for photos. A journalist tried to hand her a microphone, asking, "Corporal Parker, what were you thinking in that moment when he saluted you?" Emily smiled gently. "Just that I needed to salute back." Laughter rippled through the room. But beneath it was admiration. Afterward, when the stage cleared, Reynolds found her backstage, his expression thoughtful. "You handled yourself perfectly." "Thank you, sir," she said, exhausted but smiling. He nodded. "But remember, Parker, attention fades. What you did wasn't about fame. Keep being that same Marine who stood at the gate. That's the real honor." She nodded firmly. "Yes, sir." They stepped outside into the crisp evening. The Washington skyline shimmered in the distance, monuments glowing in gold light. Emily stared at them, silent for a while. Reynolds spoke first. "You know, there's something about moments like this. The world looks at one small action and sees a story. But you and I, we know it's not a story. It's a standard." Emily turned toward him. "Sir, do you ever regret your time serving?" He smiled faintly. "Every scar, every mistake, no. I regret the times I stayed silent when respect was missing. You reminded me not to." For a moment, they stood side by side, both in perfect posture, both gazing toward the Capitol dome. Two soldiers from different worlds, one seasoned, one just starting, bound by a single act of mutual respect. As they left the event, Emily's phone buzzed. A message from Sergeant Miller back at the base. "Proud of you, Parker. You made us all stand a little taller today." She smiled, slipping the phone back into her pocket. That night, as she sat by her hotel window, overlooking the city lights, she realized that something inside her had changed forever. She'd spent years thinking her duty was to follow orders, to guard, to serve quietly. But now she understood it was something deeper, to uphold the dignity of the uniform itself. And though the headlines would fade, and the applause would quiet, one thing would remain: the salute that started it all, and the meaning behind it. Respect, earned and given freely. She whispered softly to herself before turning out the light. Once a gate guard, always a Marine. Outside, the stars over Washington glimmered faintly, like distant medals pinned across the sky. When the transport jet touched down at Camp Rainier, The same dusty wind that had once carried the hum of ordinary mornings greeted Corporal Emily Parker again. The applause and bright lights of Washington were already fading into memory. Out here, the air smelled of engine oil, sweat, and discipline. She stepped off the plane in her dress blues, duffel in hand. No red carpets, no cameras, just the base she had always known. A few soldiers glanced her way as she passed. Some smiled proudly. Others looked away. The whispers had started again. "Hey, that's her. The one from D.C. Yeah, the Pentagon's favorite Marine. Wonder how long before she gets promoted." Emily ignored them. She hadn't asked for any of this. All she'd wanted was to serve, to do her duty right. Yet somewhere along the way, that simple goal had become a national headline. When she reached the gate that had started it all, Decker was already there, leaning against the guard booth, a grin stretching across his face. "Well, if it isn't our celebrity," he said. "Did the president ask for your autograph?" Emily laughed, shaking her head. "Not quite. But I did shake a lot of hands." He studied her face for a moment, his grin fading. "You okay? You look different." "I feel different," she admitted. "Out there, they made it sound like I changed the world. But when I landed, it was like none of it mattered anymore." "That's the thing about fame," Decker said. "It never salutes back." The next few days were awkward. Her story had inspired half the base, but the other half resented her for it. Some thought she'd been promoted unfairly. Others whispered that Reynolds had used her for publicity. The admiration she once felt around her started to turn cold. During roll call one morning, Lieutenant Harris made a point of reminding everyone about chain of command discipline. His tone was sharp, his eyes landing squarely on Emily. "Respect must always follow the rank structure," he said loudly. "No exceptions. Some people forget that when cameras start flashing." Emily kept her jaw tight and said nothing. After formation, Harris stopped her near the hangar. "Enjoying your fame, Parker?" he asked casually. "Just doing my duty, sir," she replied. He stepped closer. "Don't get comfortable. Around here, you're still a corporal, and you'll be treated like one." "Yes, sir." As he walked away, Decker muttered, "He's got it out for you bad." "I don't care," Emily said quietly. "I just want to get back to work." But that was easier said than done. Wherever she went, the mess hall, the motor pool, even the gym, people either stared or avoided her. Her name had become something bigger than her. She missed anonymity. She missed being just another soldier doing her job. One evening, after a long shift, Emily stayed late at the gate. The sunset painted the sky in streaks of orange and gold, the air heavy with summer heat. She stood at attention, watching the last convoy roll through, when a familiar black SUV appeared in the distance. It slowed to a stop. The window rolled down. Commander Jack Reynolds sat behind the wheel, the same calm confidence in his eyes. "Evening, Corporal," he said. "Sir," she saluted sharply. He smiled faintly. "Heard you handled yourself well in Washington?" "Trying to, sir. Things have been different since I got back." He nodded knowingly. Different doesn't always mean easy. Sometimes respect turns into envy before it turns into real change. Emily looked down briefly. "Feels like half the base thinks I don't deserve any of it." Reynolds got out of the SUV, walking toward her. His boots crunched on the gravel. "You know what my first CO told me when I joined the SEALs?" "What's that, sir?" "When they start talking about you, it means you did something they couldn't." She smiled slightly. "Was he right?" Reynolds chuckled. He was. But he also forgot to mention that it gets lonely at the top, even when the top is just a story someone built around you. They stood in silence for a moment. The base lights flickered on one by one, bathing the tarmac in yellow glow. And Reynolds said quietly, "You know, there's a SEAL motto we live by. The only easy day was yesterday. You're living that right now. Yesterday, you got praised. Today, you've got to prove you still deserve it." Emily straightened. "I understand, sir." He gave a faint nod. "Good. Then keep doing what you do best. Stand your post, no matter who's watching." With that, he saluted her. Again, first, then got back in his SUV and drove off into the dusk. The moment was brief, but it grounded her more than anything else could have. Later that week, Emily's test truly came. At 0230 hours, alarms blared across the base. A supply convoy had taken fire during a night training operation just outside the perimeter. Every available guard was called to reinforce checkpoints. Emily threw on her gear and sprinted to Gate 14. Decker was already there, adrenaline pumping. "They're rerouting the convoy through us," he shouted over the sirens. They secured the gate, weapons ready, eyes scanning the darkness beyond the floodlights. The rumble of engines grew louder as the first Humvee rolled in, bullet marks across its armor. Soldiers inside looked shaken but alive. Emily directed them through, barking clear, calm commands, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Keep it tight. Lights low. Move, move." In that moment, every trace of doubt disappeared. She wasn't the Pentagon Marine anymore. She was a soldier again, doing exactly what she was trained to do. When the last vehicle rolled through safely, Harris appeared, panting, his uniform half undone. "Parker," he shouted. "Who authorized you to take command here?" "I did what was necessary, sir," she said, standing tall. "Protocol requires the senior guard to take control until officers arrive." He glared at her, ready to argue, but Reynolds' voice came from behind him. "She's right, Lieutenant." Everyone turned. Commander Reynolds stepped out of the shadows, having arrived moments earlier. His expression was calm but commanding. She did exactly what a Marine should do, act with discipline and initiative under pressure. Harris stiffened. "Yes, sir." Reynolds looked at Emily. "Outstanding work, Corporal. You kept your head when others lost theirs." "Just doing my duty, sir." As the chaos faded, the soldiers began to whisper again. Not gossip this time, but respect. By dawn, the base was secure again. Emily stood by the gate, exhausted but proud. Decker approached, a grin spreading across his face. "Guess what, Parker? You just earned back every ounce of respect you lost. And then some." She smiled faintly. "I wasn't trying to." "I know," he said. "That's why it worked." As the sun rose, painting the base in soft gold, Emily looked out toward the horizon, where the convoy had disappeared and silence had returned. The flag above her head caught the morning wind, snapping sharply against the pole. For the first time since Washington, she felt at peace. The salute had made her known. The chaos had made her respected. But her calm in crisis, that had made her trusted. And in the end, that was all she ever wanted. The morning of the ceremony arrived with a crisp, golden sunrise sweeping over Norfolk Naval Station. The air smelled faintly of ocean salt and coffee drifting from the base cafeteria. Soldiers hurried in clean uniforms, shoes polished, voices low but buzzing with excitement. Word had spread across the entire base. Corporal Emily Parker, the gate guard who'd been saluted first by a SEAL commander, was receiving an official commendation. It wasn't just another award ceremony. It was the story behind it. It stirred something deep in everyone's hearts. Emily stood before her small locker in the barracks, carefully straightening her uniform. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pinned her nameplate and adjusted her rank insignia. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, chin lifted, shoulders squared, but her eyes betrayed a storm of emotion. She took a deep breath, reached into her pocket, and pulled out her father's worn silver medal, the same one she'd carried every shift at Gate 14. She pressed it against her chest, whispering, "You're coming with me, Dad." As she stepped out, Private Jenkins, a young recruit who often worked near the gate, caught up to her. "Ma'am, they're saying even the SEAL team's coming to see it. Is it true?" Emily smiled faintly. "We'll find out soon enough, Jenkins." He grinned, shaking his head. "Never thought a gate guard could shake the whole base like this." "Neither did I," she replied softly. The ceremony hall was small but filled to capacity. Flags lined the walls, brass gleaming under the light, and rows of officers, sailors, and enlisted men stood in neat formation. The murmur quieted as Commander Jack Reynolds entered, his uniform pressed to perfection, his medals shining. He walked straight to the podium, every eye following him. Emily took her place in the front row. Her heart thudded so loudly she was certain others could hear it. The commanding officer began the proceedings with formalities, reading citations, but the room's energy shifted when Reynolds stepped up to speak. He cleared his throat, and for a moment the silence was almost reverent. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his deep voice steady, "today isn't about rank or medals. It's about the power of integrity." He paused, scanning the crowd. "A few weeks ago, I was driving through Gate 14, something I've done hundreds of times. But that morning was different. I was met not by protocol, not by casual indifference, but by precision, by respect, by a salute so sharp it cut through years of routine." He turned his gaze toward Emily, whose breath caught. "I didn't return that salute out of politeness," he continued. "I returned it because I recognized something rare in Shekable honor, something this uniform was built to represent." A quiet murmur rippled through the room. Reynolds continued, voice firm but heartfelt. "Corporal Parker didn't know I was watching her. She didn't know who I was. Yet she treated that moment like the most important of her life. That kind of discipline doesn't come from orders. It comes from within. It comes from values instilled long before the uniform." He paused again. "Her father served before her. Died in Afghanistan, I've learned. I never met Sergeant Parker, but if he's watching now, I want him to know his daughter honors him every single day she puts on this uniform." Emily blinked rapidly, fighting tears. The room was utterly silent, save for the hum of the air conditioner. Reynolds reached for a small folder on the podium and unfolded a letter. "By the authority of Naval Command, it is my privilege to present Corporal Emily Parker with the commendation for exemplary conduct and representation of military values." The applause that followed was thunderous. Emily stood frozen for a moment, then walked toward the front as her name echoed through the speakers. Her boots clicked sharply on the polished floor, each step echoing louder in her ears than the applause. When she reached Reynolds, he extended his hand, then instead of shaking it, saluted her again, slow, deliberate, respectful. For a moment, the entire hall stood. Officers who'd been in service for decades rose instinctively, following his lead. It wasn't just a salute anymore, it was a statement. Emily's throat tightened. She returned the salute firmly, her heart swelling with pride and disbelief. When Reynolds finally lowered his hand, he leaned closer and said quietly, "Your father would have been proud, Corporal. You've reminded all of us what this uniform truly stands for." She nodded, barely able to speak. "Thank you, sir." He smiled faintly. "No, thank you." When she stepped off the stage, the soldiers clapped and cheered. Some shouted her name. Jenkins, standing at the back, wiped his eyes discreetly. As the ceremony ended, several officers approached her with handshakes and words of praise. "We need more soldiers like you. That salute hell, that's history now. You made us remember what it's all about." But amid the noise, Emily felt strangely quiet inside. Grateful, yes, but humbled too. She hadn't set out to make a statement. She'd just done her duty, the way her father taught her. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Commander Reynolds found her standing by a window overlooking the base. The sun glinted off the harbor, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Reynolds broke the silence. "You know," he said, "I used to think respect came with rank, that it had to be earned through battle or command. But that day at Gate 14, he shook his head, smiling faintly. You taught me it's something simpler. It's about how you show up when no one's watching." Emily looked down, her voice soft. "That's how my dad lived. He said the world might not always notice, but your conscience will." Reynolds nodded slowly. "And that's why he'd be proud. You've carried him with you in every salute." For a few moments, they just stood in silence, two soldiers from different worlds, bound by one shared understanding of honor. When he finally turned to leave, he said, "Keep that fire burning, Corporal. The Navy needs it." She smiled. "Yes, sir." As Reynolds walked away, Emily slipped her father's medal back into her pocket. The medal felt warm against her palm, now not heavy, not burdened, but alive. Outside, the flag above the ceremony hall rippled in the breeze. Soldiers passed by, some stopping briefly to salute her as they went. She returned each one calm, precise, proud. That night, back in her barracks, Emily sat by her bed, the commendation framed neatly on her desk. She didn't stare at it long. Instead, she opened her small notebook and began to write a letter. "Dear Dad, they gave me a medal today. Said I made them remember what a salute means. But you already taught me that. You taught me that respect isn't about being seen. It's about doing what's right when no one's looking. I think Commander Reynolds saw that in me. Maybe he saw a bit of you too. Your daughter, Emily." She folded the letter carefully, slipped it inside the frame behind the commendation, and smiled through tears. Outside, the base was quiet, except for distant waves and the low hum of night patrols. Emily looked out at the darkness and whispered, "Good night, Dad." For the first time since taking the gate post, she felt completely at peace. The early morning fog rolled gently over Norfolk Naval Station, wrapping the gates, the barracks, and the parade grounds in a soft gray haze. The faint hum of engines, the rhythmic clank of boots on asphalt, and the distant sound of gulls circling above the harbor blended into a quiet symphony that only those in uniform understood. Corporal Emily Parker, now wearing the rank of sergeant, stood once again at Gate 14, the same place where everything had begun. The metal of the gate was cold under her hand, the same old paint faded by years of sun and rain, yet for her it felt sacred. This was no ordinary post anymore. It was a place of transformation, a place of legacy. Months had passed since her commendation ceremony, but the story of the salute had never faded. Soldiers still whispered it to each other, especially to new recruits arriving for their first day of duty. "You know this gate?" One would say. "This is where a SEAL commander saluted a corporal first." That story had turned into something larger than Emily ever intended, something alive. She watched the base slowly wake up, the trucks rumbling in, officers walking briskly across the yard, the flag still furled, waiting to rise with the first light. The world felt different now. Her post wasn't punishment, wasn't routine. It was a reminder of what quiet honor looked like. "Sergeant Parker." A voice called from behind. She turned to see a nervous young Marine jogging toward her, his cap slightly crooked, his steps uncertain. He stopped abruptly and saluted too fast, his arm shaky. "Private Daniels reporting for gate training, ma'am," he said, his voice cracking slightly. Emily hid a smile. "At ease, Private. You're early." "Yes, ma'am." "Wanted to make a good impression." "That's already a good start," she said, adjusting his posture gently. "But next time, take a breath before you salute. Respect isn't a race, it's a rhythm." Daniels nodded, cheeks flushed. As they began their morning routine, checking vehicles, verifying IDs, maintaining form, Emily watched him carefully. He reminded her of herself during those first few months, eager, anxious, desperate to prove that he belonged. Around mid-morning, as the fog lifted and sunlight streamed across the base, a convoy approached the gate. The vehicle slowed to a stop, and one of the senior officers leaned out. "Everything good here, Sergeant?" He asked. "Yes, sir. Just training the new guard." The officer nodded approvingly and waved them through. When the last vehicle passed, Daniels exhaled. "I was so nervous, ma'am. I thought I'd mess up." Emily smiled faintly. "Nervous is good. It means you care. Just remember, every salute you give, every ID you check, every order you follow, it's not about perfection. It's about pride." He looked at her curiously. "Is it true, ma'am? The story they tell about you and the SEAL commander?" She paused, glancing toward the distant horizon. "It's true," she said softly. "But it wasn't about the salute. It was about understanding why we salute." Daniels frowned slightly. "Why do we, really?" Emily turned to face him, her expression calm but serious. "A salute isn't just a formality. It's a language. It says, 'I see you. I respect what you stand for.' It doesn't matter who starts it. It matters that it's sincere." That day, a commander saluted me first, not because of my rank, but because he saw something worth saluting. Daniels nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. They went back to work, and as the sun climbed higher, the gate filled with more traffic delivery trucks, patrol jeeps, civilian contractors. Emily watched Daniels begin to grow into his role, his movements becoming smoother, his voice more confident. By noon, the flag atop the base fluttered boldly against the blue sky, casting its shadow across the gate. Emily couldn't help but feel a swell of emotion. She remembered the long days when she'd stood here alone, barely noticed. She remembered the ache of her father's loss, the quiet moments she'd spoken to his medal in her pocket. And now, standing as a mentor, she realized she'd become part of something far greater than herself. After the lunch rotation, Daniels hesitated before speaking. "Sergeant, may I ask something?" "Go ahead." "When the commander saluted you, how did it feel?" Emily took a long breath. "Like time stopped," she said finally. "It wasn't pride. I felt it was gratitude. It reminded me that doing the right thing, even when no one's watching, can change everything." He nodded thoughtfully. "I hope one day someone salutes me like that." She smiled. "They will if you earn it without expecting it." The afternoon passed quietly. The routine became muscle memory: salutes, checks, clearances. Yet, in the still moments between, Emily found herself lost in reflection. She thought about Commander Reynolds, about the night he told her that respect wasn't tied to rank, but to character. She hadn't seen him since the ceremony, but his words had lingered like an oath. As the sun dipped low and the gate cast long shadows on the pavement, a familiar black SUV approached. Emily's heart skipped. The vehicle slowed, stopping right before the gate. The window rolled down, and there he was. Commander Jack Reynolds, calm as ever, the faintest trace of a smile playing at the corner of his lips. "Good evening, Sergeant Parker," he said. She straightened immediately, hand snapping to a salute. "Good evening, sir." "Welcome back to Gate 14. Reynolds stepped out of the SUV, much to Daniel's surprise. The base guards nearby turned discreetly, sensing another moment in the making. The commander approached Emily, his eyes soft but steady. "I was just passing through, but I couldn't help stopping by. I hear you've been training new recruits." "Yes, sir." trying to make sure they understand what this gate stands for. Reynolds nodded approvingly. Gate 14's become something of a legend. You know that, right? Emily smiled faintly. So they tell me. He studied her for a long moment, then glanced at Daniels. You're learning from one of the best, son? Don't take that lightly. Daniels stood straighter than ever. Yes, sir. Then Reynolds turned back to Emily. Without warning, he raised his hand and saluted her again, firm, deliberate, full of the same respect as before. Emily's chest tightened, and she returned the salute instantly. The gesture was simple, wordless, but it carried the weight of everything they'd shared, everything she'd stood for. Reynolds lowered his hand and smiled. Keep it alive, Sergeant. You've done more for this base than you'll ever know. With that, he climbed back into his SUV and drove away, leaving the faint echo of tires and respect in his wake. Daniels turned to Emily, eyes wide. He did it again. The commander saluted you. Emily chuckled softly. No, Daniels. Today, he saluted what this post stands for. As the evening sky bled orange and gold, Emily stood beside the young recruit, both of them watching the flag flutter in the fading light. The base quieted down, the day's noise giving way to the soft hum of crickets and distant engines. After a moment, she looked at Daniels. You know, she said, you'll take over this post soon. When you do, remember something: this gate doesn't just guard the base. It guards our values. Every salute here should remind someone why they serve. He nodded earnestly. I'll remember, ma'am. Emily took one last look at the gate, her eyes warm but distant. The ghosts of her past, the weight of duty, her father's voice, their first salute, all felt lighter now. She touched her pocket where her father's medal still rested, the medal cool but comforting. Then, with a quiet smile, she turned to Daniels, gave him a crisp salute, and said, Respect starts here. The young Marine hesitated only a moment before returning it perfectly steady, strong, from the heart. As Emily walked away from Gate 14 for the last time, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the world in hues of gold and crimson. The legend of the Gate 14 salute lived on past from one soldier to the next, a quiet flame that refused to die. And in that stillness, as the flag rippled one final time in the breeze, it seemed almost as if somewhere beyond the clouds, Sergeant James Parker was saluting too.